Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ken Burtis, the faculty advisor to the Chancellor and Provost, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the third event in the 2018-19 season of UC Davis Forums on the Public University and the Social Good. Provost Hexter, who usually delivers these welcome remarks, regrets that he cannot join us today, and I say what the speechwriters wrote, but actually he's in Hawaii, so I'm not sure how much he regrets that. But I'm sure he will regret missing today's comments. The UC Davis Forums was established in 2012 and presents about a half a dozen lectures each academic year by experts from a range of disciplines. The series was designed to promote informed and thoughtful dialogue among members of the campus community and the public on the following subjects: the major challenges facing the public university, ways of responding to those challenges, and how the public university is evolving. With an ultimate goal of helping to produce a public university that will best serve society and individuals, this series poses the following question: what can and what should the public university be in the 21st century? In our preceding 6 seasons, the UC Davis Forums has presented distinguished speakers on a wide range of topics pertaining to the public university and the social good, including educational access and affordability, diminishing public confidence in and funding for public institutions, and equity and diversity in the academy, among many others. I invite all of you to visit the series website, forums.ucdavis.edu, to find information about all this season's events, as well as videos of past events. In several earlier forums, we explored different aspects of the public university's research enterprise, including its contributions to regional prosperity, its responsibilities with respect to urgent societal problems, and challenges associated with funding and metrics of productivity. Just last month, we discussed the reproducibility problem in scientific research. Today's presentation promises to be an excellent complement to all of these earlier events, and it directly speaks to our series focus. Today, we are delighted to welcome Adam Gamoran, President of the William T. Grant Foundation. President Gamoran will speak on the topic, "Can universities serve the public good?" using rigorous research for social impact. To his credit, he will not only describe one way in which our research enterprise could be improved and better support UC's mission of public service, but also present a strategy for accomplishing that goal. President Gamoran will get a proper introduction shortly, but before that, I have a few thank yous and announcements. I would like to thank all who have made this event today possible. First and foremost, President Gamoran, for coming to our campus to share your knowledge and ideas. Next, the UC Davis Forums Steering Committee, led by Martin Kenny, Professor of Human and Community Development, and also our moderator for this event, Jacob Hibble, Associate Professor of Sociology. Finally, I want to acknowledge the campus units that have joined the Office of the Provost to sponsor this lecture: the Community and Regional Development Program, the Center for Regional Change, and the Center for Poverty Research. One more announcement: after today's presentation, there will be a Q&A period and then a reception in the lounge. We hope that you can all stay for conversation and refreshments. And now, without further ado, Professor Hibble.
A quote to start us off. The mission of the university is to develop human resources to discover and disseminate knowledge, to extend knowledge and its application beyond the boundaries of its campuses, and to serve and stimulate society. Inherent in this broad mission are methods of instruction, research, extended training, and public service designed to educate people and improve the human condition. Sound familiar? This is a passage from the famous mission statement of the University of Wisconsin, where our speaker this afternoon taught for 30 years, serving at various points as the chair of the nation's top-ranked sociology program, the director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research, and the John D. MacArthur Professor of Sociology and Educational Policy Studies. He was elected as a member of the National Academy of Education and also the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He's received awards for career contributions to education research from the Association of Public Policy and Management, American Educational Research Association, and just recently this past fall from the American Sociological Association. He was twice appointed by President Obama to serve on the National Board for Education Sciences. Since assuming the role of president of the William T. Grant Foundation, Dr. Adam Gamoran has steered the foundation in the direction of supporting research that moves beyond simply measuring or documenting inequalities in youth outcomes, and instead seeks to advance our understanding of practical approaches to reducing those disparities through improved programs, policies, and practices. True to the promises of the Wisconsin idea, Dr. Gamoran continues a quest for rigorous scientific research that creates positive change beyond campus boundaries. Like the University of Wisconsin, our public land-grant university embraces a similar mission to improve the human condition. In the words of our chancellor, quote, "We are a university on the rise with exceptional capabilities to address the humanitarian crises of our time, be it healthcare or public health, immigration, climate change, poverty, or environmental impoverishment. But, as Dr. Gamoran will explain, there are steps our university could take to increase our ability to capitalize on those exceptional capabilities, which our community already possesses." As one example, the Center for Poverty Research, where Dr. Gamoran delivered a fascinating and stimulating talk earlier this afternoon, is a multidisciplinary research and training center focused on applying rigorous empirical approaches to solving what Chancellor May called one of the great humanitarian crises of our time. In addition to hosting research and policy conferences on campus and in our state's capital, the Center for Poverty Research's affiliates, who belong to 3 colleges as well as the schools of education, law, management, and medicine, author more than 65 policy briefs that are disseminated to legislators across our state and nation. They provide expert legislative testimony and consultation on government panels, publish op-ed columns on current social problems in the nation's leading newspapers, maintain a website of policy-focused empirical research findings that averages nearly 50,000 page views a month. The Center for Poverty Research is funded entirely through the individual grant-writing efforts of committed faculty affiliates, and it's a demonstrated example of the human resources that this university has at its disposal as we boldly go into the Chancellor's vision of a future of publicly engaged scholarship. What are some concrete steps our university could take to support this sort of work? Must faculty and students' engagement in public scholarship necessarily come at the expense of their career advancement? We're excited to be able to facilitate the Chancellor's vision by teaming with the UC Davis Forums to bring Dr. Gamoran to campus today to share his insights on these and other questions related to UC Davis's goal of facilitating rigorous research that serves the public good. Please join me in welcoming Dr.
Well, thank you both for that very warm introduction. I'm not sure I really need to give the talk now because you've kind of given the punchline, which is fine. I'm not sure this microphone is on. Do I need the microphone? Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Can you hear okay? All right, so I won't, it doesn't matter. Anyway, thank you so much. And one story that Jacob didn't tell is that it was the Poverty Center originally that invited me to talk. And when I said what I wanted to talk about, they said, "That's great, but we have a different forum where we want you to speak about that." And so hence I'm here today. But that meant I had to come up with another talk to give to the Poverty Center today. So, that's all right though. I'm never at a loss for words, so I'm happy to give two talks in rapid succession. It reminds me of the days when I taught 2 classes per semester. So. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it seems like UC Davis is an ideal place to be trying out this message that I have about the ways our universities can do more to support public impact research. Certainly, this is a university that has long been committed with its roots in agricultural science, long been committed to supporting the needs of the region and the state. And so if the message that I'm carrying is going to take hold anywhere, I would imagine that this would be a likely place. So perhaps this is a best case scenario for me to be delivering this talk, but I'll be very interested in your reactions. First though, how many of you are on Twitter? Okay, if you're on Twitter, you should take out your phones, follow the William T. Grant Foundation on Twitter, because we are tweeting various links connected to this talk, as well as to tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I'm giving a talk about how to get money from the William T. Grant Foundation, and we'll be tweeting out some resources in connection with that. So follow the William T. Grant Foundation on Twitter. I always put those little things there to remind me to say that. All right, Universities are under attack from many quarters. Everyone thinks the current state of higher education is awful, says the Washington Post. Who is to blame? Our universities. Why are they failing? In the New York Review of Books. Universities are hoarding money. Stop them, says the Times. Bureaucrats in building. The case for why college is so expensive, Forbes Business Journal. The returns to a college education are diminishing, claims a writer in the Wall Street Journal. Is college worth it? Asks The Economist. Professors are overwhelmingly liberal. Do universities need to change hiring practice? The political divide over higher education in America, according to the Gallup polls. And after I prepared this slide just a couple weeks ago, February 8th, 2019, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Revenge of the Right, how conservatives learned to loathe higher education. With articles such as, "This is higher education's gilded age. A gulf has opened between rich elite colleges and all others." The Right's Huff. Get it? It's a play on words, the right stuff. The Right's Huff. How conservatives learn to loathe higher education. The university has never been an ivory tower. Intellectual purity is a myth, and we should abandon it. The great disappearing teaching load. Are professors teaching too few classes? I'm sure that would get a big resounding yes here. How to make students better thinkers, and when an academic life ends. All right, so universities under attack from many quarters. Now, what can we do about this? How can we respond to the challenges, to the justification for universities and our mission, how we go about pursuing our mission? Well, one response is we could do more to prepare students for social responsibility. If we could prepare students to be active citizens, engaged community members, productive members of our economy, then perhaps that would assuage some of the concerns that have been raised. And many universities, perhaps this one, have been taking steps to prepare students for social responsibility with programs such as service learning requirements, bringing community members into classrooms to educate students about how they can engage with and contribute to their communities, so that students engage in their classes with real-world problems. Some universities have created programs to train social entrepreneurs. Innovative business schools, for example, have focused not just on marketplace entrepreneurs, but social entrepreneurs, young people who develop innovative ways of serving the social good. Applying insights from startup ventures to social problems. Some universities have tried to implement a social impact curriculum. And so these are all valuable responses to the challenges facing our universities, but notice that they push the response off to the next generation. They say, well, in our training function, we can promote social responsibility by helping prepare the next generation of young people to be more socially engaged. But this pushes off the responsibility to the next generation. What about now? What can we do now? A more immediate response is to support and encourage research aimed at social impact. So we can support and reward faculty whose research matters for social policy. Now, in medicine and engineering, faculty are rewarded for tech transfer. Indeed, it is regarded in some circles as the pinnacle of success. But in the social sciences, where I work, policy relevance is often met with disdain. So it is time for this to change. And that is the focus of my remarks today. So I put up this list of criticisms, but do university faculty members really care about all this? Rarely. And why should they? University researchers are insulated from external criticisms. We are awarded for our contributions to academic fields. Our job is to generate knowledge for its own sake, and whether we are successful in doing so is revealed in the journal articles we published and the books we produce. We are striving to innovate in the content of our research, and we keep close track of who's innovative in the content of our research. But we show little imagination when it comes to getting research used for anything beyond contributing to a research literature. Universities, in fact, offer little incentive for social impact in the social sciences. Moreover, rigor and relevance are often seen as in opposition to one another. If work is rigorous, then it's not relevant to real-world problems. If work is relevant to real-world problems, it's not seen as rigorous. But rigorous research is theoretically driven and using methods that fit the question is valued, whereas relevant research addressing problems in the real world is disrespected. This is a false dichotomy. Indeed, research benefits from engagement with problems of the real world. And research, I argue, is only relevant if it is also rigorous, if it uses methods that are well aligned with the question that it intends to address. Because research aimed at practical problems is devalued, it is often structurally marginalized within the university. It's counted as service instead of research. Sure, I helped this state agency. I provided a research synthesis for this nonprofit. I prepared a case study for this school district. But, and that's nice. We'll give you a pat on the back. Every professor should do research, teaching, and service, and this is your service. But that's, as we all know, that's not what counts in a top-flight research university such as this one. And as a result, applied research, applied social science, is more often found in research firms than it is in universities. But universities have much to gain from addressing social problems as part of their research mission. After all, a public university such as this has a public mission. Why is the state of California paying for UC Davis? Yes, it's to train students, but it's also to serve as a support for the state. Private universities, likewise, are pressured to serve their communities. The ivory towers in a sea of poverty, as the University of Chicago was often described when I attended it, can increase their community support if they serve their communities in a more active way. Moreover, even when research is relevant, often it is not used to support improvements in policy and practice. There are some signs of change, however. During the Obama administration, a bipartisan panel came together supported by Paul Ryan from the House Republican from the House of Representatives and Patty Murray, a Democrat from the Senate, to create the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking. And this commission met for 15 months, overlapping, extending beyond the Obama administration into the current administration. A bipartisan commitment to using evidence for better decisions in government, and to use data we already collect to make smarter policy decisions while protecting privacy. Shockingly, not only did the commission conclude its work under the Trump administration and issue its 22 recommendations, but both houses of Congress passed the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, and on January 14th, 2019, in the midst of the government shutdown, President Trump signed the act. And this act implements about half of the recommendations of the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking. It requires federal agencies to create data inventories. This will create transparency that has never existed before on what data our federal government agencies are actually collecting. And this is not only to inform the public, but to alert researchers to possibilities that exist. The Act encourages federal agencies to make those data available. Now, notice the difference between what's required and what's encouraged. So I don't want to exaggerate the value of the Foundation for Evidence-Based Policymaking. It is a lot more about encouragement than it is about requirement. It's a lot more about the production of evidence than about the use of evidence. And it doesn't bring any new funding, but it still does some good things. Encourages agencies to make data public. It encourages agencies to use government data to generate evidence about the programs that they themselves are sponsoring. Perhaps the most concrete step, potentially, is to create a common application system for researchers who are pursuing access to restricted confidential data. So if you're in my area of inequality research, you're all very familiar with the work of Raj Chetty at Harvard and his Opportunity Project, where he got federal data from Social Security and from the IRS and was able to merge that with various social surveys and research experiments, and has opened up a new world of insight about economic mobility. The problem is only Raj Chetty has the data, and you can there are ways of accessing the data through Chetty, but it's not easy. Why should one team at Harvard have access to the government data and nobody else does? So the Foundations for Evidence, the motivation behind this act and the motivation for the commission recommendation is to create a system where everybody can can gain access to these data, assuming obvious privacy protections are put in place. And so the first step is to establish a common system that will be common across federal agencies for individual researchers to apply for access to data. Ultimately, the aim and one of the recommendations of the commission was to create a national secure data service, which would be a service to provide data securely to researchers in response to this common application. So the act that was passed into law didn't go as far as the commission recommendation, but it did establish a government advisory committee to review data coordination and data access, to make to lay the groundwork for the National Secure Data Service. So it's an important step forward, especially in what seems like dark times for the production and use of evidence. As I said, though, it has limitations. It's more about the production than the use of evidence. It doesn't involve any new funding. Hard to get any government agency to do anything if you haven't given it more money to do it with. And it encourages rather than requires agency to promote data access for researchers. The most ambitious features of the Commission's recommendations were not included, the National Secure Data, Service. Nonetheless, and another feature of the Commission's recommendations not included in the law was, the federal government pays for states to collect a lot of data. So in my field of education, for example, all states now collect massive amounts of data on student attendance, student performance, the schools they attend, and they're linked from year to year by students, and they're linked to teachers and schools. And most of these data collections were funded by the federal government through a program called the Longitudinal Data Systems Grant. And yet, the federal government has no access to these state data. In fact, when the National Center for Educational Statistics implemented its most recent longitudinal survey, the Educational Longitudinal Survey, it oversampled students in 10 states and reached agreements with the state education agencies in these states that it would be able to link these survey data to the longitudinal data collected by states. You can imagine how valuable this would be for researchers. For those who analyze longitudinal surveys, you would have yearly data on student performance instead of every other year, and you could relate them to the actual teachers and classes the students were in. For people who examine educational administrative data, you would have a survey database to attach it to, so you'd know information about family background, you could get attitudes, social and emotional learning, etc. from the survey. So a tremendous synergy by putting the two together. In the end, not one of the 10 states agreed to send their data and make them available to the federal government, let alone to outside researchers. So the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking recommended that the federal government require that if the feds are paying for the state data, the states have to agree to link them to the National Secure Data System. So that was also not part of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, to my regret, but it's understandable. They went for the low-hanging fruit. First, they went for the provisions that could establish an easy consensus rather than for the harder stuff. Still, it's an important step forward. It sets the expectation that data collected by the government should be available for evidence building and increases the motivation for policy relevant research. Indeed, it promotes instrumental and conceptual research over the tactical use of research evidence. So now if we turn from the production of evidence to the use of evidence, do policymakers ever use evidence? Sure, they use evidence all the time. Here's how they use it. They make a decision, and then they say, okay, what evidence is out there to support the decision I've already made? We call that the tactical or symbolic use of research evidence. That's not what the William T. Grant Foundation is after. We are after the instrumental and conceptual use of evidence. So by instrumental, we mean I have to make a decision. Well, let's see what the evidence says. Now, one view of instrumental use of evidence is that first we do some research, and then that logically leads to a decision. But in the real world, that's not how it works. Because, first of all, there are a lot of other things besides research that furnish evidence that's relevant to a decision. There's experience, there's local data, there's practical judgment, practical wisdom. Policy decisions are never made in a vacuum. They're always made in a political context. They're always value-laden. The argument here is not that evidence should drive decisions, but rather that evidence from research should be part of the conversation. Politics and values are always going to figure into it. And there are different constituencies who will make their desires known, whether it's staffs or clients or any other constituencies. And we're not just talking about one-time decision in one place. There are multiple decisions over time that are relevant. So even with an understanding of the more nuanced way evidence can be used instrumentally in research decisions, there is still a key role for researchers to produce the kind of evidence that can be used to serve public policy and practice. Conceptual evidence, the conceptual use of research evidence, is not about making a decision based on evidence, but rather using evidence to understand the problem in a new way, or to identify new potential solution sets rather than driving towards one particular kind of decision. And this is equally valuable and needs to be recognized as another way that research can come into play. So what steps can we take to improve the usefulness and use of research? And in particular, what is the role of the university in supporting faculty who might carry out this type of research, carry out research that can be useful in policy and practice? Some think that the reason research evidence is not used is because the quality of evidence is poor. So if the quality of evidence is poor, why should anybody bother paying attention to it? It turns out, though, that the story is more complex. Improving the use of research evidence is one of the priorities of the William T. Grant Foundation. And we've learned a lot from our grantees about what conditions lead to evidence being used and under what circumstances evidence is less likely to be used. The William T. Grant Foundation was founded in 1936 by William T. Grant. In its long history, it's been committed to understanding human behavior through research. The specific focus of the foundation has changed over time according to the pressing problems of the day. Today, the mission of the William T. Grant Foundation is to support research to improve the lives of young people. And within that broad mission, we have two specific areas of focus. So first of all, what does young people mean? It means young people ages 5 to 25 in the United States. And the two areas of focus are research on ways to reduce inequality in youth outcomes, and research on improving the way evidence from research is used in policy and practice decisions that affect young people. So early studies in our portfolio on the use of research evidence identified barriers to evidence use. It's not timely, it's not relevant, it's not accessible. But other studies began to identify conditions that support the use of evidence. And it turns out that the use of evidence is not very well connected to the quality of the evidence. Indeed, we have many examples of good evidence being ignored and bad evidence being used. It turns out that evidence use is much more closely related to the relationships between the producers and consumers of evidence and the intermediary organizations. The intermediary organizations that bring producers and consumers together. Now, to support relationships, you need some kind of a structure. And one kind of structure that's emerging all over the country is the research practice partnership. So this is a sustained partnership between a research organization like a university and a policy organization like a public agency, where the two entities unite to co-develop a research agenda. The research organization can then implement the agenda, and the questions that are asked are ones whose answers really matter to the decision makers in the policy organization. And so at the William T. Grant Foundation, armed with these insights, we launched a new phase of our grant making on creating the conditions for evidence use. We're supporting research that tests actionable strategies to improve the use of existing evidence, or research that tests strategies for producing more useful evidence, like getting researchers to ask questions whose answers really matter to decision makers, and research that tests our assumption. You know, as a research funder, and probably you as researchers, we all assume that if only the decision makers would listen to the findings of our research, their decisions clearly would work out better. But that's an assumption. We don't actually know if that's true. And we are now starting to fund some grants that will take this assumption seriously and test it by looking at whether decisions that are aligned with the evidence yield more positive consequences for youth outcomes. So we have funded several promising new studies. Some of these involve tools to foster evidence use. For example, Fiona Holland and Henry Levin at Teachers College have a grant to develop a cost-benefit analysis tool for school districts so they can make better decisions about what programs to adopt. We've funded research on interventions to create conditions for evidence use. For example, a knowledge management system for school-based mental health providers, and a relationship building system for researchers and congressional staff. And we supported descriptive studies that will ultimately build such interventions. Now, it's not a new idea to go from evidence use to social impact. And Jacob, in your fine introduction, you quoted University of Wisconsin and UC Davis some public pronouncements that have been made in the past about, about moving in this direction. The Wisconsin idea is the notion that the boundaries of the universities are the boundaries of the state. And indeed, Wisconsin has long had a tradition of valuing this kind of publicly oriented scholarship. Unfortunately, under the 12 years of the Scott Walker administration, we shifted from this idea of publicly oriented research to the idea that the mission of the university is to create a workforce for the state. Hopefully, we'll go back to a more publicly oriented mission of the university now. A second example comes, and just to contrast the public university with a private university. So Rice University has as one of its primary themes, engage Houston and empower its success. And this is very common among urban private universities to try to empower their urban communities. But Rice has actually carried it out through, for example, the Houston Education Research Consortium, which is a partnership with the local Houston Independent School District and more recently with several surrounding school districts as well, to address the challenges of the local population. And they've developed research reports, 25 research reports, to inform local decision making. And they've been very successful developing a basis of trust with the Houston School District so that the district is willing to co-develop the agenda for research and then to listen to the findings that get produced. And this effort on the part of Rice University has subsequently attracted philosophic dollars from civic-minded allies. So there are philanthropists in Houston who say, we want to put our money behind this kind of thing because this is helping make our community stronger. Now, faculty engagement in this kind of community-oriented work requires institutional support. Faculty have not typically been trained for this kind of engaged scholarship. As I said at the outset, faculty rewards are typically in response to contributions to an academic discipline, not to community service. And so to help promote this, what our foundation has done is to create a new grant-making program, which we call the Institutional Challenge Grant. The Institutional Challenge Grant challenges universities to rethink the incentive structure for faculty to participate in engaged scholarship, that is, scholarship that engages with their community to serve the public interest. It rewards engaged scholarship and research practice partnerships. It has several components. The first is that it calls on universities to build a partnership with a public agency or a local nonprofit organization. Second, it challenges the university to develop a joint research agenda and to provide fellows to carry out the research agenda paid for by the grant. Third, the aim is to build the capacity of the public agency or nonprofit partner to use evidence in its decision making. And fourth, the goal of this funding program is to challenge universities to reshape its incentives so that faculty will be motivated to carry out and to participate in this kind of research. So what are some examples of institutional change that will support faculty engagement? Now again, I think in medicine and engineering, carrying out research that ultimately has a technology transfer payoff is highly valued, but that is atypical in the social sciences. So we need to take some steps if we're going to move in this direction. For example, providing teaching releases to faculty who are actively involved in research practice partnerships. Providing summer salary for faculty who collaborate with external partners on research. And reconsidering how research contributions are judged in career advancement decisions. As I said at the outset, typically, if a faculty member engaged in research as part of a partnership, it's considered service, and it's not valued very highly. We should rethink this. We should reconsider how research that contributes to public policy and decision making is research, not mere service. We can obtain measures of contribution of applied research. Now for research that contributes to the research literature, we might look at the impact factor of the journals that it appears in, or we might look at citation counts. Well, we can get quantitative measures of the social impact of research. For example, mentions in the print media or social media, or mentions in policy deliberations, appearances in legislative hearings. There are plenty of measures that can be tallied up. Likewise, now, how do you know if you're considering a faculty member for promotion? How do you know if their research is valuable? You seek testimonials. You solicit letters from other experts in the field. And the letters say, this person contributed to the research literature in my field in the following way. Well, why couldn't we solicit a testimonial, a letter from a policymaker who said this person's research contributed to my thinking about this policy problem, or contributed to the decision I made to implement or kill this social program? So we can develop qualitative and quantitative measures of the social impact of research, just as we now provide quantitative and qualitative measures of the research impact. Why is it that contribution to the research literature is the primary benchmark for judging the worth of a research contribution? Who is to say that the contribution to the research literature is more important than the social impact of a research contribution? And there are reasons for this relative esteem. Often research that serves the public good is not using cutting-edge methodological tools because the questions are simple. The questions are often descriptive. The questions often rely on exposing a situation rather than analyzing cause and effect. Of course, some cause and effect analyses are essential in policy deliberations, such as looking at the impact of social programs. But that's not always the case. In fact, that's probably not the predominant case. If you look at the 25 research reports produced by the Houston Educational Research Consortium, which has informed the decision-making of the Houston Independent School District in the 5 years this research practice partnership has been in existence, you'll see that most of the reports are descriptive, and yet they've been highly relevant. And so it's not about the methodological rigor, it's about whether the research evidence influences the conceptual or decision making of the public agency, of the decision maker. So, institutional challenge grant competition. So our first competition, applications due September 2017. We had submissions from 41 institutions all around the country. And the first grantee, the first winner of the contribution was Cornell University, working in partnership with the cooperative extension of Tompkins County, which is a rural county in upstate New York. The focus of the research is to address the opioid epidemic and to reduce child maltreatment, which is a consequence of the opioid epidemic, or which has spiked because of the opioid epidemic, as revealed in these two graphs taken from their application. The graph on the left shows the incidence of child maltreatment cases in Tompkins County as compared to New York State as a whole. So while maltreatment in the state as a whole was going down, and of course if you're looking at statewide data from New York, that's driven by New York City. Whereas in Tompkins County since 2013, a big spike. And meanwhile, the data on the right is hospitalizations for various reasons. So you can see, for example, the blue line at the very top is hospitalizations for alcohol abuse. The red line in the middle that's shooting upward, that's for heroin abuse. And so that was spiking upward coterminously with the increase in child maltreatment. So this is the problem that the this new research practice partnership is trying to get a handle on. They are evaluating 2 specific interventions, one in the judicial system and one in child welfare. The judicial system one is drug treatment courts, and the child welfare one is a program called Strengthening Families. The aim is to build the capacity of Tompkins County to make research-informed decisions and to identify new ways to support and reward faculty members who participate in these partnerships. Our second competition occurred beginning in September of 2018. We had 20 applicants. We had 4 finalists, and the winners are... I can't tell you yet, but if you follow us on Twitter, you'll find out in about a month. The selection committee has met and has made a determination. I will tell you, and you are the first to know, that there are going to be 2 winners this year. But I can't tell you who the winners are until our board approves them on March 21st, and then those will be announced. So we hope that these research practice partnerships will create new avenues for supporting research through partnerships that ultimately serves the public good. We've taken one other step to promote social impact research, and this was a one-time thing which may or may not be repeated, but it was our way of responding to the unexpected results of the 2016 presidential election. Like many, we were shocked by the results, and after we pulled ourselves together from weeping, we tried to think about what we could do. Our commitment to reducing inequality is certainly threatened, especially because of threats to vulnerable populations that are coming from all corners of the Trump administration. And so we initiated a rapid response research grants to support efforts to protect vulnerable children in challenging times. So these were designed for cases where research exists, but the research needed to be contextualized for specific situations. So for example, we made a couple of grants in social services for children of immigrants, another one having to do with the integration of Muslim refugee children in school, another on school safety for teenage sexual minority youth, another on rebuilding youth employment services in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria, and yet another responding to the opioid crisis in rural Ohio. We've had some early signs of success from these grants. For example, the one on integrating Muslim refugee children in school, this was Duke University in collaboration with the Durham Public Schools and World Relief Durham, a refugee resettlement organization. They developed a professional development program for teachers and piloted in one elementary school. Subsequently, they've received new funds, which have allowed them to expand the program to all schools in the Durham Public Schools. And so we're seeing this effort persist. Of course, they're not receiving new refugees at this point because refugee admissions have been almost completely halted in the Trump administration, but at least they're helping teachers in the schools deal with the refugee population that they have. Another example is the effort to support research on rebuilding youth employment services in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria. Now, so this was a partnership between a nonprofit in Puerto Rico that approached us and said, youth employment's been devastated like everything else following the hurricanes in Puerto Rico. What can we do to rebuild in a research-informed way? So we connected them with MDRC, a researcher named John Martinez, who happens to be of Puerto Rican descent, but is not an expert on programs in Puerto Rico, but he is an expert on youth employment programs. And so we connected MDRC and this nonprofit in Puerto Rico with a third person, Hector Cordero Guzman, a researcher at Queens College who is an expert on Puerto Rican society. So those three working together, they took the existing research on youth employment, contextualized it for Puerto Rico, and then they created a research synthesis which they delivered to the highest levels of state government in Puerto Rico, with education agency staff and labor staff and child welfare staff. So they've had cross-agency collaboration between labor, education, housing, and children and families. And they're poised to act. I hope we will see action based on this report. Both the Institutional Challenge Grant and the Rapid Response Research Grant combine our interests in reducing inequality in youth outcomes and using evidence for policy and practice. The Rapid Response Research Grants is a short-term program where the research already exists. And also, a unique feature of these grants is that the application must have the engagement plan in mind. You know, typically, to give a grant, you expect there to be a dissemination plan, right? Here's how I'm going to tell everybody what I found. I'm going to make a presentation at a national conference. I'm going to publish 3 research articles. That's not what this is about. This is about identifying a nonprofit or a public agency that is poised to act on the basis of the evidence. They need to know what the evidence says because they want to do something and they're not sure which way to go. And that has to be written into the application. An engagement plan that says, here's what we, the nonprofit or public agency, is going to do once we have this information. So the engagement plan has to already be in place. That's the Rapid Response Research Grants. The Institutional Challenge Grant is for the long term with a research agenda, but the research hasn't already been done. It is to conduct original research. And it includes a plan to build the capacity of the nonprofit to use evidence, but doesn't necessarily have a full-blown engagement plan already. It also needs to include a plan to change incentives or structures in the university to support engaged scholarship. Both show the value of applying rigorous research to pressing social problems. So getting high-quality, relevant evidence used is the primary obstacle facing advocates of evidence-based policy. The evidence movement has focused on the supply of evidence. It needs to be relevant, it needs to be rigorous, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be high quality. But we need more attention to the demand for evidence, creating a culture of evidence, a climate in which evidence is valued. We need to think about this as a two-way street. All too often researchers think about this as unidirectional. I figure stuff out, then I tell you about it, and you do what you do. But we need to listen. We researchers need to hear what problems exist, what questions need to be answered, and design our research agenda with those questions in mind. The quality of the relationships, as I've argued, matter more than the quality of the evidence. And we need to consider conceptual as well as instrumental use of research evidence. Pursuing positive social impact by harnessing the talent and knowledge of faculty is the key to the future of universities. Faculty will need to become more engaged in responding to real-world evidence. If we want to respond to the Chronicle on Higher Education, bash the universities material, we need to become engaged in responding to real-world problems. And universities can help by reorienting incentives, not to diminish theoretically driven, internationally recognized studies, but rather to enhance the visibility of work that meets the challenges of the day. Universities have the power to make these changes. I think the forum that this talk is part of is evidence that UC Davis is committed to this, and I think we need to take steps to act. Thank you.
We have some time for Q&A before the reception. Are you comfortable?
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I want to thank you for an excellent, timely presentation. I want to mention 2 issues which I think are significant barriers. One you alluded to. The first is merit promotion system, which has a huge impact in terms of directing faculty to doing research, ideologic research, not the engaged research you're talking about, and diminishing the value of service. Yep. And the second issue is university rankings. which are largely based on research dollars, publication impact, and all of the things that you're trying to say need to be changed in terms of their influence.
Yeah, so I certainly agree with both of those points, and I agree that I emphasized the first and didn't emphasize the second, but I completely agree with you about the second point as well. In fact, we, with our grantees, we have talked about, the idea has come up about developing our own ranking system for the S factor, or the S impact ranking for social impact. And we've thought about, could we come up with a defensible system for quantitative, for measurement of social impact using things like media mentions, legislative deliberation, number of partnerships, dollars devoted to partnership-oriented research, or something like that. And so if anybody has suggestions about what you think should go into the S factor that would compete with those ranking systems, I'd be very interested. I want to say one other thing in response to your first comment about merit and promotion system, which I think is really important. And I think our merit and promotion systems do need to rethink how we value engaged scholarship. My argument is more geared towards mid-career faculty than early career faculty. Not everybody agrees with me on this, but my position is that early career faculty, assistant professors, really are best served by responding to the academic literature that they're engaged with for two reasons. First, because there are skills to be developed in the early career, whether it's conceptualizing problems, relating, how to craft a research article, or building one's repertoire of methodological tools. And so focusing in the early career on building those skills, I think, is extremely important. And the second reason is that if you can build your visibility and credibility as a scholar in the early part of a career, that can pay off then if you take a more engaged approach as you approach mid-career. It's for that reason that in our institutional challenge grant, we require the fellows to be mid-career, that is 8 to 20 years post-PhD, rather than positioning that as an avenue for postdocs or assistant professors. Not everybody agrees with me, including I've had pushback from assistant professors in audiences like this saying, I want to do this now. My advice is hold off, wait until you have tenure, then pursue an engaged route. Not only because it's risky, but also because there are real skills that you're developing as an assistant professor, and there's a boost to your reputation that will come if you apply this later. Yes, in the back.
So, as I understand universities, we have income from really, if you think about two sources. If you're public, the state students from the state and from tuition and from grants.
That's three sources, right? State support, tuition, and
right,
external funding.
One is one body, which is basically the undergraduates. And then the other is, of course, grant support. You're proposing another task for the university, which of course we know already has multiple tasks in society. And yet, where's the funding going to come from? And what you said was philanthropy, which is great in Houston. We have a lot of wealthy people who have certain directions that they would like research to go. For places that are, let's say, more funded by Sacramento, which doesn't quite have the wealth of Houston, this becomes a little more tenuous. Plus, of course, we know increasingly the critiques of philanthropy are that philanthropy actually directs research in certain directions that the philanthropist loves, which may not, of course, address inequality at all or some other issues like that. Yeah. In Houston, so the environment.
I think that's an excellent and very appropriate question and concern. And I've got an answer. So the answer is that research practice partnerships need infrastructure support. They need infrastructure support from the university, from the community, from the philanthropic community. But that is just the smallest part of their revenues. They should be able to compete for national funding through research competitions that research funders like the William T. Grant Foundation or the Institute of Education Sciences or NIH are supporting, because the work they should be doing should support not only the national community but other communities. So I think there are avenues for support for engaged scholarship, but you have to put some infrastructure funding into it. And whether that comes from the university, whether that comes from philanthropists, you know, I think there are small liberal arts colleges that will have trouble developing this kind of infrastructure support, but I don't have any doubt that UC Davis could develop the philanthropic and or state and or indirect cost recovery funds to create this kind of infrastructure if it were seen as a priority. I would say one more thing relevant to this issue of funding, which is that about the role of philanthropists. I'm uncomfortable with the critique of philanthropy that's come out, you know, where they say, who elected Bill Gates to run the education system of America, etc. Look, what we need to do is tax rich people. Then we can take their money and make democratic decisions for how to spend the money of rich people. And I'm totally in favor of that. Unfortunately, in this country, we refuse to tax rich people. And so they get to keep their money. So we should praise the rich people who are giving their money back to public service in areas that they care about. And if it's the Waltons supporting school choice, or if it's the Gates supporting curriculum standards development, or if it's, you know, the Russell Sage family supporting research on inequality, whoever it is, they're to be praised for this. The only basis for this critique is that they're putting their money into areas that they care about. But of course they're putting their money into areas they care about. It's their money. If you want democratic control over rich people's money, tax them. Otherwise, you got nothing to talk about. That's my opinion about that. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what do you say then about your counterparts, for instance, the kinds of people you've been mentioning, who apparently and more clearly for decades have been partnering with universities, at least some departments within universities, to advance the kinds of policies and mindsets that bring on this inequality that you're trying to fight. I'm thinking of the Koch brothers at the University of Virginia as an example. I'm thinking of even UCLA, their presence there with, just read an article. But so what I'm suggesting is that I'm not sure that the university, so when the university has been weaponized to some degree by folks with goals that are not consistent with increasing equality, what do you say?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm of course very familiar with the work of the Koch brothers philanthropy to support a political agenda, and their contributions to ALEC, their contributions to political actions committees. I'm less familiar with what they've done to work through universities. They're probably best known for their work on criminal justice reform, which is inequality reducing side rather than a inequality generating side. But setting aside that I don't, I'm not exactly sure what the specific examples are. Setting that aside, I put that on the university faculty who are doing that work. If they want to take money on how to help rich people get richer, that's what they're doing. That's not the kind of work that interests me. That's not the kind of work that interests the William T. Grant Foundation. That's not the kind of work that interests most university faculty, which is exactly the basis for the right-wing criticism of universities. There's far more, and I don't apologize for this, but there's far more work in universities that's directed towards left-wing causes than right-wing causes. So I don't lose any sleep worrying that the fact that philanthropy supports research in universities means that some of it could push a right-wing agenda, because there's a lot more of it pushing a left-wing agenda. Again, it's up to the university faculty member to decide what agenda he or she is pursuing with funds that are available. And if we want democratic control over wealth, we should tax it. Telling philanthropists they can't give their money away to support causes they favor, I think is wrong-headed. So that's my response.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you. I'm thinking about the supply end of the engaged scholarship. So thinking about the kind of training and capacity that faculty need to be able to listen carefully, as you mentioned, to be able to engage with really diverse communities, to be able to connect their research to policy in ways that typically coming out of a PhD program isn't provided. So I'm wondering, have you seen any particularly promising practices around that kind of training and capacity building? Something that you probably heard earlier today, you'll hear more about UC Davis really building up that public scholarship approach. One element is trying to engage more faculty to have the skills to be able to do that well. So
Yeah, that's a great question. I have actually seen one positive example of this, and this was with the Institute of Education Sciences is the funder of education research out of the U.S. Department of Education. And they had a period of funding of predoctoral training programs. And in the shift from the G.W. Bush administration to the Obama administration, one change that was made was a requirement that these training programs do more to engage with partnerships. And so the last wave, which I guess was funded in 2014, the last wave of these partnerships had an engagement requirement, a training requirement for training. So I'm familiar with the application at Wisconsin, which I created that training program, and I was involved peripherally in the last grant, which was funded the year after I left. So I'm familiar with what they did at Wisconsin, and I think several, there were, at their height, there were about 15 of these around the country. And so they were all, anyone that wanted to get refunded when the Obama administration started had to develop these plans for training grad students in education research to do engaged scholarship. So that's one example, but it's a very limited and narrow example. But I do think the idea that I think the point you make is really valuable, and I think the idea of building engagement into graduate training programs is very appropriate. And of course, it would require, how do you get faculty members to do something? You put it into their grad students training program, and then the faculty have to do it. So putting this as an emphasis in graduate training might be one way of convincing more faculty members to be involved in these kind of research practice partnerships to create opportunities for their faculty. Yeah?
So one sort of observation that sort of contextualizes locally your claims about junior, mid, and senior level faculty. So we did a baseline survey here to find out what's going on across different rankings, and we found out statistically significant that our associate professors are the ones that are struggling the most with supports around doing engaged scholarship. So that's one finding. The other 2 points I would make is related to the different career levels. Harry Boyd's study looking at specifically engaged faculty, interviewing many senior public scholars that were close to retirement or retired. And one of the biggest regrets that they articulated in his interviews was that they did not do this work early in the career. And one of the biggest misgivings was that they were mentored not to do this because they had to focus on the things that you are arguing for junior faculty.
Right.
And so that's important, I think, to think about that in terms of not only in terms of the potential impact of faculty that could do it earlier, but some ethical issues around how we mentor our junior faculty. And the other part of it too, I think we have to acknowledge that not all junior faculty are the same, and there are different disciplinary traditions that lend themselves more to this work, like you said, engineering, et cetera. So I want to make sure that that we have to be very cautious about applying our own disciplinary bias when we say all you have to do is focus on the journal articles. It really is disciplinary dependent on the criteria that disciplines actually articulate for the junior scholars. So that's more context to, or maybe a response to your statement. The question I have actually goes back to your institution challenge grants. You're asking the grantees to articulate some movement on the merit promotion or recognition for the faculty, if I'm correct.
Well, that's an example.
Right.
You know, universities can come up with their own creative ideas
Right.
for how to incentivize engaged scholarship.
So-
it wouldn't
so-
have to be.
Right, so what are some of the sort of best practices either proposed in these grantees or ones that you've seen to actually move the needle on things such as merit and promotion?
With regard specifically to merit and promotion, there are some universities that we've seen in the applications where they've specifically designed criteria related to engaged scholarship as part of their usually promotion to full and less frequently in the promotion to associate, but where they've specifically written in contribution to practice or contribution to policy and practice is one of the explicit criteria for evaluating the research. Everybody's got that in the service, but contribution to research. And then other universities have done other things. Well, one applicant this year proposed developing a research practice professor track. And this was controversial within the selection committee, with some people saying, great idea, this is a way of promoting engaged scholarship, and other people saying, terrible idea, another way to marginalize engaged scholarship. So we'll see where that goes. And then some of the other things I mentioned, summer salary or course buyouts for developing the partnerships is another thing we see with some regularity. Those are some of the things we've seen. Yeah. Okay, one and then two.
So I just wanted to mention that you may be aware of this already, but the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities is leading an initiative called HIBAR, Highly Aligned Basic and Applied Research.
No, I didn't know it. Say it again, what's it called?
HIBAR, Highly Aligned Basic and Applied Research. So it doesn't focus specifically on social science-related research, it's all research at the university. And there's a group of 10 universities, we're one of them, that has been involved in this for about the last 9 months or so, and it's starting to gain momentum. One of the 4 sub-working groups is actually specifically focusing on tenure and promotion related incentives to encourage people to get more involved in societally impactful research, we'll say, in general. So there's definitely a lot of interest, and actually one of the main discussion points has been somewhat the absence of a forum to help the university engage with other key partners that are needed to actually affect the new knowledge that's being created. A lack of alignment and incentives at an institutional level is something we're trying to look at. And certainly another one is we've had that conversation as well about what stage in an academic career do you try to intervene or in some way support people. And it's many vice chancellors for research involved in this group actually, and more of them have kind of come over to the thoughts of earlier in people's career could be better because you have a better chance of changing the status quo in the longer term by not having people fall into the exact same mold as those that have gone before them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is, I swear I've never used this in my 25-year career, but this is going to be more of a comment than a question, that threaded line, but it's relevant to all of this. And as I think about what you said about, protecting or keeping junior faculty focused on the more strict disciplinary, I think one concern that's been expressed a little is that then they get into that mode of research. And I just want to raise the possibility that occurred to me sitting here for this group that at the University of California, we have, you may know, a highly developed review system that goes on for many years post-tenure. And it occurs to me that I worry a little bit that in this environment, that idea of waiting until after tenure to broaden in this way, because we have sort of the same review going on, might make it a little harder for us to kind of make that change. And I'm interested in what you or people here might think of that as a potential local
Yeah, well,
challenge to us.
I'm appreciating the discussion. I think there are two ways of looking at it. So I wouldn't back off from what I said earlier about the importance of developing skills and reputation, but I accept the concern that if you wait, you get people into one paradigm and then it's difficult, and I don't see the value in moving to a different paradigm. So I think it's a legitimate concern. Yeah, in the back.
I think it might not be as hard to move the needle on evaluating embedded research and community engaged research programs with regard to recognition of faculty contribution, as some of the comments and some of your own comments have suggested, in that, as has also been said, it's the norm for some disciplines. It is common in education, it is common in public health, it's frequent in nutrition. So across different colleges and divisions and practices, it's done to greater and lesser extents. And yet those faculties' merits and promotions are all decided by the same Committee on Academic Personnel here at UC Davis or other administrative bodies, whether it's done through Academic Senate or through administration. The people who are making the decisions on merit and promotion are recognizing that different disciplines have different conditions and different markers of success. So that suggests it's not as much the change in the university administration's perspective on how to recognize engaged scholarship and this kind of work. It's more of almost a discipline level informed approach of changing our peer network's perspectives on each other's work, not devaluing the person in the office next door to you if they're doing work that isn't just getting published in ivory tower journals.
Yeah, I completely agree with the larger point, but I wouldn't say that makes it any less difficult. I would say, in fact, that in some ways makes it more difficult. Okay, here and then back there.
Yeah, well, so many things to comment on, but I'll actually build on the last one. If we really take engaged scholarship seriously and the kind of accountability and structures for legitimacy that are necessary to be asking the right questions, it's a lot for individual faculty members to create that. And so I'd suggest, sure, it's fine to think about incentive structures for individuals, but I think we ought to be talking about some of the organizational structures within the universities. And that creating, whether you want to call them institutes or centers or whatever, that actually have this kind of engagement, faculty could then opt in a safer way. And you don't have to say, I'm an engaged scholar, I'm not. You say, I'm engaged here. I didn't hear much of that in your talk.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because, in fact, that is the point of the research practice partnership. So, if you're at the University of Chicago, there's the Chicago Consortium on School Research, and you can be in the sociology department doing your sociology stuff, but then you can do a project with the Chicago Consortium on School Research, or the Consortium on Chicago School Research, and you have this built-in avenue for engagement. That's exactly right. That's what these collaboratives are for. That's what they facilitate.
So we have many of those here too. I don't know how to. There's a mixed feeling about whether that's a good allocation of scarce institutional resources.
Yes.
I would agree with Tom. So many things to comment on. And I was delighted that you funded Cornell Cooperative Extension in Tompkins County. It's near and dear to my heart. But
why is
you
that?
didn't fund 40 other projects. What? You funded 2% of your projects.
Correct.
Oh, I don't know. I ran it for about 5 years. It ran me for 5 years. But more to the point, you're interested in how you...
Well, this year we'll fund 5%.
5%.
Yeah, because we only had 20 applicants. The first year we had 40 applicants.
I would encourage you to look at what you didn't fund as much as you're looking at the one you did fund, one. Secondly, how it impacts policy broadly. It's nice that you've done this in this rural county of upstate New York, but how does it impact policies at the state level and at the federal level? But more important, the other question I want to raise is, how problematic is it for you to target engaged scholarship as service, and not the research and not the teaching as service. To take this scholarship and put it into an area that's kind of like what I do when I go to my son's fifth grade class and give a lecture. That's service. Or I serve on the United Way campaign in a state or a county. That's different than engaged scholarship. We relegate it to this service component when the other two components of the university are equally service. If you're going to lump it into service, why not put all of them together?
Yeah, so I'm arguing that engaged scholarship should be counted as research, not counted as service. And I'm making this argument because service is marginalized. Service is something you have to check the box and not be a complete zero in, but it's not what gets you promoted. The research that gets you promoted, I'm sure, at UC Davis. And so I'm arguing that engaged scholarship should count as research if it responds to real-world questions and if it uses methods that are aligned with the question, even if they're not at the cutting edge of the discipline. So that's the case I'm making.
We could debate that, the definition of what research constitutes.
Okay. Yes?
Yeah, I grappled with this for 3 years as Associate Vice Provost for Outreach and Engagement here. And part of that was a survey of all the recipients of our Distinguished Public Service Award. So it's about 60 of those faculty who UC Davis recognized as distinguished in public service. And one of the key findings was that it wasn't academic reward, it was personal satisfaction and values that were a key driver for those individuals. And I think, that's something to speak to, that, people do this not just because of the academic returns, but for other values as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, that we shouldn't think that it's only if we provide these kind of academic rewards that people will be motivated to do this work. In fact, we're not providing a lot of academic rewards now, and people are still doing this, but perhaps we could get more if we provided more incentives. Yes?
Thank you very much for the presentation. Incredible work that the William T. Grant Foundation is seemingly leading the way on as you presented, but I'm sort of curious about this larger project of transforming the university in this way. To what extent is the William T. Grant Foundation connected with other foundations or other institutes that's pushing a similar agenda, and to what extent are you hearing support for this?
So one change that has happened with the William T. Grant Foundation during the 5 years that I've been at the helm is we have opened up many more collaborations with many other foundations. Our closest collaborator is the Spencer Foundation, and they, in fact, have a program of funding for research practice partnerships, and there'll be more news this spring on that front from them and from us. And then the Laura and John Arnold Foundation is another close collaborator of ours, and we've worked together on several initiatives, one of which is I would characterize as a research practice partnership in the justice system sphere. This is a grant to the Institute for State and Local Government at CUNY to create a data infrastructure and conduct baseline research for the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office to monitor the implementation and impact of a set of reforms that the new District Attorney Eric Gonzalez is implementing to try to reduce the rate of incarceration and reduce disparities in incarceration in Brooklyn. Another frequent collaborator for us is the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and we're collaborating with them in the area of child welfare to try to promote and advance research practice partnerships. So those are a few examples of collaboration with other foundations that where I think there is a lot of interest. Of course, the real money in the research world is the federal money rather than the philanthropic money. And so trying to create change there is more challenging. The Institute for Education Sciences had, during the Obama years, seed funding for research practice partnership. They've just ended it. The National Institute for Justice had a program for funding on the use of evidence. They ended it. So I think there are some ebbs and flows in this, and I hope we'll see more of it in the future.
So that concludes our Q&A section, but we have a nice reception until 4:30 that we can hopefully continue some of these conversations. Now please join me in thanking Gamoran.
Thank you.